Welcome to the Surviving to Thriving podcast with Jim Squire. I'm a licensed psychotherapist here in Toronto, Canada. And the title of this episode is Imposter Syndrome, Knowing You're Capable and Still Feeling Like a Fraud. Well, people don't typically come in saying, I have imposter syndrome. They come into my office saying things like, I keep waiting for someone to figure out I don't actually know what I'm doing. And I'm hearing that from senior executives, lawyers, physicians, people who from the outside look like they have every reason to feel confident. And yet, that quiet, persistent sense they don't quite belong, that their accomplishments are somehow accidental, and that the next evaluation will be the one that finally exposes them. That's what we're going to talk about in this episode. This episode is part research, part clinical reflection, and a little bit personal. I want to give you some real grounding in what we actually know about imposter syndrome, where it comes from, what's underneath it, why it's so stubborn. And toward the end, I want to offer an exercise for starting to interrupt the pattern, not just understand it intellectually. So where does imposter syndrome come from? Well, the term was coined in 1978 by two psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, who were studying high-achieving women at a university in the United States. What they observed was striking. These were accomplished, capable women who generally believed their success was due to luck, timing, or some kind of error in the system. They lived in a persistent fear of being found out. Clance and Imes called it the imposter phenomenon, not a disorder, not a diagnosis, just a recognizable cluster of feelings and beliefs that showed up consistently in people who were, by any objective measure, doing well. Here's something important that often gets lost. When they first described it, they framed it as something specific to women, particularly women navigating environments that has historically excluded them. That early framing made sense given the cultural context of 1978. But subsequent research has consistently found that imposter syndrome affects people across genders, professions, cultures, and levels of achievement. A 2020 review published in the Journal of General Internal Medicine found that estimates suggest somewhere between 70% of people will experience imposter feelings at some point in their life. That's 7 out of 10. That's not a niche phenomenon. That's something woven through the human experience of striving. So what are the theories and where do they come from? There isn't one single agreed upon origin story for imposter syndrome. What we have is a set of overlapping theories, and I think that's actually helpful because for different people, different roots are more primary. Theory one is that it starts in the family system. Clance and Imes' original work pointed to family dynamics as a foundational factor. They observed two different patterns. In one family, there was a sibling who was labeled the intelligent one, and the child who later developed imposter feelings was labeled something else, the social one, the artistic one, the sensitive one. Even the child that performed well academically, the label stuck. Intelligence wasn't part of their identity, so success felt borrowed. In the other pattern, the family communicated, sometimes explicitly, sometimes through subtle messaging, that the child was exceptional, capable of anything, naturally gifted. And when the child inevitably encountered difficulty, they had no framework for understanding it. Struggle meant something was wrong, which meant any sign of struggle had to be hidden. Both of these early environments, one that underestimated, one that over-attributed, can set the stage for the same outcome, a deep uncertainty about whether your competence is real. So the second theory is it's a response to systemic and cultural pressure. More recent researchers have pushed back on the tendency to locate imposter syndrome entirely inside the individual, and they think this is an important corrective. If you're in an environment where people who look like you or come from where you come from are generally underrepresented, you're not imagining the threat. The environment is sending real signals. A 2021 paper in Harvard Business Review made this point explicitly. When we focus all of our attention on helping individuals overcome imposter syndrome, we risk ignoring the systemic conditions that produce it in the first place. That doesn't mean the feelings aren't real or worth addressing, But it does mean that work isn't purely internal. Sometimes imposter feelings is in part an accurate read of the room that isn't fully welcoming. Now, theory 3, it's a trauma response. This is the lens I bring to it most often in my clinical work. It's the one I think is most underrepresented or underappreciated in the general conversation. For many people I work with, imposter feelings isn't primarily about career or personal identity. It's much older than that. It's connected to early experiences in which their sense of self was undermined by a critical parent, by inconsistent validation, by an environment where love or safety felt conditional on performance. When a child grows up entirely sure they're worthy, not entirely sure the ground beneath them is solid, they develop strategies. And one of these strategies is hypervigilance about how they're being perceived. Another is the unconscious conviction that whatever good is happening can be taken away at any moment because the evidence of their inherent worth was never fully established. From a trauma framework, and specifically from internal family systems lens that informs a lot of my work, the imposter voice is about a protective part that developed for a reason. It learned that staying small, staying humble, staying alert to threat was the way to stay safe. That part is doing its job. It's just doing it in contexts where it no longer serves you. So what does it actually look like, the pattern? Let's bring this out of the theoretical for a moment because I want you to see yourself in this if it's relevant. Imposter syndrome isn't just a thought, it's a loop. There's a trigger, there's some form of evaluation or visibility, a presentation, a role, a room full of people who seem more established than you. Something activates a perception of threat. Then there's a thought, I don't belong here. They're going to figure out I'm not actually as capable as they think. Then there's a reaction in the body, in your behavior. Tension, hesitation, over-preparation that crosses sometimes into exhausting perfectionism, or the opposite, procrastination, avoidance, because starting means being exposed. And then this is that part that keeps looping, the loop going. There's the attribution error. When things go well, you attribute to luck, to the curve, to the fact that nobody looked too closely. When things go poorly, you attribute it to you, to proof of what you've always already suspected. Psychologists call this self-handicapping and attribution bias. And research consistently shows that people with high imposter beliefs engage in both. A study published in Personality and Individual Differences found that imposter syndrome correlates strongly with what's called self-oriented perfectionism, the kind that's driven not by high standards for the sake of excellence, but by fear of being revealed as inadequate. The loop is self-sealing. Success doesn't break in. More success often intensifies it because now there's more to lose. Finally, there's a connection to anxiety, burnout, and self-worth. It's worth naming some of what gets tangled up with imposter syndrome because it rarely shows up alone. Research consistently links imposter feelings to elevated anxiety, depression, and burnout. A 2019 meta-analysis found significant associations between imposter syndrome and both anxiety and depressive symptoms across a range of populations and professions. In healthcare, studies of medical residents have found that those with stronger imposter beliefs report higher rates of burnout and lower job satisfaction. Even when their actual competence is indistinguishable from peers, there's a real cost. Not just emotional discomfort, but occupational functioning, physical well-being, and the quality of connection people are able to have with others. There's also something important about what imposter syndrome does to the relationship with self. When your sense of capability is always provisional, always waiting for the next test, it's very hard to feel present. You're perpetually preparing for a verdict that never quite arrives, and that vigilance, that chronic low-grade readiness, to be found out is exhausting in a way that doesn't respond to rest. You can sleep 8 hours and wake up still carrying it. So what actually helps? I want to end here with some practical, because this is where I see people get stuck. They understand imposter syndrome. They can name the pattern, describe the loop, and explain the cognitive distortions involved. Then they go back to work and it happens again. The first thing I'd like to offer is this. You don't need to eliminate the feeling in order to function differently. That's a crucial reframe. The goal isn't to become someone who never doubts themselves. The goal is to stop letting the doubt run the show. And that begins not with thought, but with noticing, catching the loop early before it builds momentum. What does it feel like in your body when imposter syndrome starts to show up? Tight chest, shallow breathing, particular quality of mental noise, sensation here, a sensation there. The earlier you can notice, the more choice you have. From there, it's about creating a pause, not a long, elaborate intervention, just a small break in the automatic response. Feel your feet, take a breath, rub your hands together, return to what's actually in front of you, not the imagined verdict. That's it to start, because it's all there is, but because this is one thing practiced in real moments, small moments, not just the big ones, starts to rewire the relationship between the trigger and the response. Slowly it becomes less automatic. The deeper work, the work of actually examining where this came from, what part of you developed this belief and why, what it would mean to let it soften, that's often what's necessary in therapy. And if you're in the Toronto area or Ontario and this is resonating with you, I'm happy to chat with you. Or you can check us out at traumatherapist.ca. But the daily practice of noticing, pausing, interrupting, you can start that today. Here's a question to sit with this week. Where does the imposter voice show up most reliably for you? What situation, what room, what kind of pressure calls it forward? You don't have to answer it out loud, just get curious about the pattern, because you can't interrupt something you can't see. Start to notice where you feel it in your body, what happens physically and psychologically. Any awareness you can get that will help you notice will be helpful. That's it for today. If this landed for you, share it with someone. You probably know someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do. And by all means, send me a comment if you have any suggestions or feedback on this episode, or even ideas for another episode.